1. Background. I've been renting a bedroom out of a small house for the last few years, while I attended community college, where I still attend. This is the house I currently live in. The day I signed the lease agreement, I took a trip over to the house to meet with the property manager. He was very nice and was very happy to answer all of my questions. While we were in the kitchen of the house going over the lease terms, a tiny elderly woman came out of one of the bedrooms. She enthusiastically greeted my property manager, who then introduced the woman as his mother. We'll call her Elizabeth. He explained that she was the official owner of the property while he managed it. She lived on site and would be accepting monthly rent checks made out in her name, which made things very convenient for me. I delivered rent checks to her every month without a hitch. Occasionally, I would deliver the checks to her husband, who shared the room with her. One morning I woke up early and decided to make some coffee in my kitchen before my other roommates got up. As I was leaving my bedroom, I bumped into Elizabeth's husband, who informed me that she had passed away the previous evening during a heart surgery. She was very sweet, and I was saddened to hear about her passing. Her husband was very elderly and frail, and was unable to care for himself. I was also worried about the property, since I wasn't sure what was going to happen to it now that the landlord was deceased. The next day, my property manager stopped by with several other people, possibly family members, to clear out Elizabeth's bedroom and move her husband somewhere else, where he would be cared for by family. I opened my front door to find them all outside the house. I greeted my property manager and I was about to tell him that I was sorry for his loss. But before I was able to do so, he turned to an older woman next to him and he said, "Hey, Antlerhoof, I don't think you've met my mother, Elizabeth. She's the owner of the property." I was flabbergasted. I maintained a fairly decent poker face and shook the woman's hand, but in my mind I was like, what? Who was that old woman in my house? Was she not the landlord? Had I been calling her by the wrong name the whole time? Why didn't she correct me? How was she cashing my rent checks? Why did my property manager introduce her to me as his mother? Why did he tell me that she was the landlord? What the hell? Did I glitch into a new reality? Did reality change around me? I still have no idea who that lady living with me was. I don't even know her real name. 2. One time when I was around 14, my brother and I were sitting in the living room of our apartment. My mom was in the room sleeping because she worked the night shift. I think it may have been the weekend, or we may have had the day off from school. But for whatever reason, it was broad daylight, and my brother and I were home. Anyway, he and I spent most of the day watching TV, as kids do when given the choice between productivity and doing absolutely nothing. Around early afternoon, my mom walks out of the room groggily, looking peeved. She comes over to us and asks us why we were peeking into her room while she was trying to nap. He and I looked at each other confused and started laughing because we thought she was kidding, but she definitely wasn't. We told her that we haven't even gone near her room, but she didn't believe us. The probability of one of us walking past it was slim, because the kitchen was in the opposite direction of the rooms, and neither of us had gone to the bathroom during that time. She had only been asleep for a few hours. Even if one of us had peeked into the room, the other one would have seen it because the apartment was tiny, and the living room was at the center of it. There weren't any hallways blocking the view to the rooms. The only reason we didn't have a clear view of the kitchen itself and the bathroom. The second time something weird happened was when we were living in a little townhouse. I was upstairs sleeping in my room and my mother was in the kitchen with my little sister downstairs. It was daytime and I was either in the process of waking up or falling asleep. I can't completely remember, but I could see the room around me clearly. I just couldn't really move. I wasn't paralyzed, but I didn't have the energy to get up yet. The way you feel when you just wake up. I see my mom walk into the room looking angry, and she's yelling at me to get up, and goes on a full-on rant before leaving the room. I got a good look at her, and she looked kind of blurry and fuzzy. but I chalked that up to the fact that I wasn't wearing my glasses. My mom looks surprised that I'm awake and asks if I slept well, and makes no mention of the lecture she just gave me. Either she had switched moods really quick, or she had just lost all memory of those 5 to 10 minutes it took me to get up and walk downstairs. I don't know. It was weird. 3. A lot of strange things happened when I was a kid, and all of them having something to do with my grandma or her house. But these 2 stories are the ones I still can't explain. Number 1. After my grandma died, my cousin inherited her car. She drove it from my grandma's house to her, my cousin's house. The next day, she couldn't find the keys. She looked everywhere. Later that evening, my family decided to meet at my grandma's house to help clean and organize, share stories, etc. My cousin found her keys hanging on the keyring in my grandma's house, as if the car hadn't been moved. My mom had the spare key in her purse, and it was still there. Number 2. My grandma used to sing a song with us. It was an old Czech folk song, roughly translated to mean something about a girl named Mary and her geese. If you know of this song, please tell me, because I haven't been able to find it. I've Google searched extensively and would love to hear it again. Grandma used to tape record all of us grandkids singing and having conversations with her as we grew up. I'm the youngest in my whole family and was 14 when she died. She kept all the cassette tapes in a shoebox. The day my cousin found her key in my grandma's house, we all ended up staying the night there. This was only a couple of days after she died. I kept the box of cassettes, and after we left, my mom and I drove around listening. But I couldn't find the one with the goose song, and it was my favorite. We listened to all of them, but I couldn't find that song. I knew it existed. I remembered singing it with her, and I remembered listening to a recording a few times since. But by the time we got back to my house, it was clear that the tape was lost. When we arrived at my parents' house, we went inside and my mom hit the button on the answering machine. The message was me and my grandma singing that song. Somehow the missing tape recording was on our answering machine, and this wasn't an answering machine that used tape. As if someone had called, played the tape, and held the phone to it. My mom screamed and deleted it, and we still haven't found it. If one of my family members had done it, they would have admitted it. But everyone was just as shocked. Nothing weird has ever happened to me since that couldn't be easily explained. Until yesterday, and this is completely unrelated, I meditated for the first time yesterday. I think I've unintentionally done it before, because when I get really stressed, I tend to space out and stare at walls and it calms me down. But this is the first time I've decided to intentionally meditate. I know this sounds crazy, but it was like faint white lines were moving up my wall, and then they turned greyish purple and filled the space, moving. It looked like clouds or smoke, and became more and more visible and opaque, until it looked like my room was filling up with smoke. I got scared. Thought it might have been the result of low light and shadows, so I turned the lights on and turned the ceiling fan off. But it happened again. So I decided to go with it and keep my mind clear and see what happened. The smoke got darker, until it looked like I was having tunnel vision, but the center became a violet, bluish-purple blob. Not completely opaque, but darker than the usual visual halo. It was like the colors in the smoke separated, arranged themselves dark to light, and became more and more visible. It would grow and shrink, come closer and move further away. My dog started barking and I stopped. I haven't been able to find any explanation, except a lot of crap about auras and ghost mists. I'm really skeptical when it comes to that sort of thing. I know people can hallucinate while meditating, and I've eaten mushrooms before, but it wasn't like that. I've also hallucinated mildly due to lack of sleep, but this wasn't like that either. This was different than anything I've seen, and I can't explain it. I didn't feel anything except just scared, so it didn't feel like a spiritual experience or anything. Just a thing that happened. Am I going crazy? Has this happened to anyone else? 4. So this happened back in 2005. I live in a small town in Pennsylvania, and every year my town sets aside a Saturday to celebrate itself. It's called Nazareth Day, if anyone is interested. Mostly it's a craft show with some local musicians playing and an excuse for the small businesses in town to attract some customers. The kinda neat part is that at night the fire department sets off fireworks at the local park. It's a nice display that lasts a pretty long time, so it can get super crowded in our little town with people from all over the area coming to see the fireworks. My friend, who would later become my girlfriend of almost 3 years now, but that's a different story, and I decided to walk down to the park that night to catch the show. It was only about a 10-minute walk from my house, and I knew the way like the back of my hand. I had been living in the area pretty much my whole life, and my grandmother's house was right by the park as well. I had no problem getting there, and my friend and I enjoyed a wonderful evening together. By this point, it was around 9 p.m., and we decided to head back home and spend the rest of the night chilling at my house. The trip should have taken us only another 10 minutes tops, but somehow we managed to get lost. Again, I've walked this path so many times before that it should have just been second nature. I had walked back the way we came. I remember walking past my grandmother's house, and that's when things got strange. We hit what should have been a main road that's normally relatively busy, but somehow instead ended up in a new neighborhood. I was confused, but I didn't want to alarm my friend. She had just moved to the area from out of state during the school year and was unfamiliar with the town, so for all she knew, I was going the right way. I kept trying to assure myself that I had just made a wrong turn somewhere and trudged on, trying to find an area that looked familiar. The strangest part to me was how quiet and dead the neighborhood was. As I said, we get a lot of visitors to see the fireworks, and they had just ended, so we should have been passing lines of cars, leaving and seeing the people who lived close by, walking home like us. Instead, it seemed as though everyone were in their houses already, and there was no noise, no hint that a large gathering had just taken place, only a couple minutes away. I thought about knocking on someone's door to ask for directions, but the idea made me feel uneasy, and I was sure that I could find my way out if I just kept wandering. After a few minutes of this, my friend finally seemed to pick up that I was lost and started to freak out a little. She suffers with some anxiety disorder, so understandably, being lost in an unfamiliar area kinda triggered her. We sat down on a nearby curb and waited for her to calm down a little, before I explained that I think I made a wrong turn, but that I could find our way back to the main road. She was skeptical, but what choice did we have but to continue on? I honestly don't know how long we wandered around. Neither of us had cell phones yet, so we couldn't check the time, or call someone to pick us up or look up directions. I still kept considering knocking on someone's door, but I was both scared to do so and stubborn. This was my hometown, goddammit. I was going to find my way back. At some point, we passed into a more rural spot just outside of whatever town we were in. We could see some bright lights through some tall bushes, and so pushed our way through them to get a look. That was the other strange thing. The neighborhood was oddly dim, so the light was a welcome relief. I thought that maybe we had found the main road again, but what we saw instead left us frozen in our tracks. Somehow we were on a cliff, and below us was this brilliantly shining city. It looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. The buildings were strange shapes, and they were towering to the sky. There was nothing like this around my town. Most ways you went out of town would take you to nothing but open cornfields. I remember looking over to my friend, who had this wide-eyed look that seemed to demand some explanation that I couldn't give. As awe-inspiring as this newly discovered city was, it also gave me an extremely unsettling feeling, and standing there gawking at it wasn't going to help us. When I say we were on a cliff, imagine standing near the Hollywood sign and looking down at Los Angeles. So we headed back through the bushes and just like that, we were on the main road where we should have been to start with. There were cars going by again, and the neon glow of the local 7-Eleven had never looked so inviting. We headed in to take a breather after what happened and grab ourselves a drink. The clock in the station read just after 1 a.m. It didn't feel like we had been lost for 4 hours, but perhaps we had been, or maybe time moved differently wherever we had ended up. I spent years trying to convince myself that I had just taken a wrong turn, and that perhaps I had been overlooking some nearby town that just looked so majestic, given the circumstances of being lost. I retraced my steps so many times, trying to find the neighborhood we had been in and the cliff we had ended up on. I was never able to find them again, and my friend and I never talked about the experience until about 2 years ago. The fact that she remembers it just as vividly as I makes me believe that something really strange did go down that night. 5. This was several years ago. It's the only glitch I can recall. I was in a house with several people sometime around 8 in the evening. There were 4 people talking in the living room, while I and another guy sat on a bench near the kitchen, and the 7th person was near this bench making some food. Me and this other guy, Josh, were making small talk with this girl, Susan, who was in the kitchen. The 4 people in the living room were drinking or something, and being very loud. Everyone in the house was waiting for another person to arrive, Mike. He was leaving somewhere at an undesignated time on his bike, so we knew he'd be there soon. But it did start to take a while, so Susan sent him a text. He didn't respond, and 2 minutes later I decided to call him just to see if he'd answer. He did. I asked him where he was. He said up the street on his bike he would be here soon. I said all right. Then it got awkward. And I like awkward, so I just listened to the white noise on his end. It was actually a very loud wind sound, and it had made him kind of hard to hear. I assumed this was a normal riding on your bike noise. Maybe cars passing him. I didn't think much of it then. Eventually he said something like, "So who is all at the house?" I told him. We continued making very small talk as he rode on his bike. This call was mostly me just listening and looking around the room while he talked. I noticed Josh had been eavesdropping on the conversation, which was fine. He resolved right away who I was talking to, and kind of gathered that Mike was close. Halfway through this call, around when I'm telling him who is in the house, nodding at Josh as I say his name, Susan, right next to us, receives a call. She answers and talks. But I wasn't paying attention to the words. Josh was, though. After 2 or 3 minutes in my call, Mike says, "Okay, I'm nearby, I'll see you soon." Apparently succumbing to my awkwardness. We hang up, and I look at Josh again, and he's giving me the weirdest look. "Who was that?" he asks, sounding almost scared. "Mike," I say, trying to look confused, so he'll tell me what the deal is. But right then it hits me that Susan is definitely talking to Mike on her phone. Her and Mike knew each other pretty well. I'd heard them arguing, and they were doing that now. Not exactly a fight, but definitely a heated back and forth. I'm shocked. I look back at Josh, who still looks confused, and say something like, but I was just... And he says something like, yeah, I know, I thought... We sit there and listen to Susan argue with Mike. It calms down about a minute later, and she gets off her phone, and sees us looking at her. We explain what happened. She seems skeptical, but plays along, looking worried. We must have been pale or something, probably frantic. Anyway, eventually she makes a comment about how she hadn't heard wind sound on the phone, and I say that I had. And it was very confusing. Susan went back to what she was doing, and Josh and I just sat there, dumbfounded. It made no sense how those 2 calls could have happened at the same time. Why was my call so windy, and Mike had sounded so muffled? But Susan's call seemed fine. Mike had 2 conversations at the same moment. It made no sense. Josh had told me he was listening to both calls intently, and knew there must have been moments where Mike was talking on both our calls simultaneously, but saying different things. You know, based on me and Susan's responses. Eventually he got back to the house. As soon as he did, Josh and I asked him what happened. He seemed confused and eventually just said, "Oh, well, you called up, and then after that I called Susan." I said something about how I thought he'd hung up because he was riding while using a phone by cars, or at least it was really windy, so maybe going fast. He just said, "No, I was coming through the back roads. I was going really slow and it wasn't windy at all." And that was all that happened. He started greeting everyone and people started doing their own things. The only people who for sure heard this were me and Josh, and I don't see him anymore. I wonder how strange it seemed from his perspective. Ever since I first heard about these glitch stories, I've thought about that moment. It's just strange and I've never gotten it out of my head. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Glitch in the Matrix Stories 26. I know I said I might not do a glitch video this week, but ironically, is that the right word? While I had been planning on perhaps trying some other things this week, I got plenty of glitch stories and none of the other ones I was going to use. That's just the way it goes sometimes, but hey, at least we've got a video and hopefully you'll all enjoy it. At least we've got a video for today. Tomorrow we'll still have paranormal, and we're actually looking pretty solid for a TIFU this Saturday, so... But I'm still going to be looking out to try some new things, just, you know, to make sure there's plenty of variety on the channel. Keeps me happy and hopefully keeps you guys happy as well. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.